Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Death Row Criminals Final 24 Hours Episode 5. Introduction. Randall Wayne Mays, born in 1959, became a central figure in a high-profile Texas capital murder case following the deaths of two Henderson County Sheriff's deputies in 2007. Initially sentenced to death in 2008, Mays spent over a decade on death row as his case navigated multiple appeals, primarily centered on his intellectual disability and mental competency. In a significant turn of events, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals resentenced him to life without parole on the 27th of March, 2024, aligning with U.S. Supreme Court. Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Death Row Criminals Final 24 Hours Episode 5. Introduction. Randall Wayne Mays, born in 1959, became a central figure in a high-profile Texas capital murder case following the deaths of two Henderson County Sheriff's deputies in 2007. Initially sentenced to death in 2008, Mays spent over a decade on death row as his case navigated multiple appeals, primarily centered on his intellectual disability and mental competency. In a significant turn of events, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals resentenced him to life without parole on the 27th of March, 2024, aligning with U.S. Supreme Court precedent prohibiting the execution of intellectually disabled individuals. This report provides an in-depth examination of the crime, the evidence presented, the trial proceedings, the evolving verdict, the reactions from families and the public, the current status of his case as of the last 24 hours, and the penalty execution process that would have applied had his death sentence been carried out. 1 Crime. Overview. On the 17th of May, 2007, Randall Mays, then 47 years old, engaged in a deadly shootout with Henderson County Sheriff's deputies at his residence in Payne Springs, Texas, a small community approximately 70 miles southeast of Dallas. The incident resulted in the deaths of two deputies and the wounding of a third, marking it as one of the most severe attacks on law enforcement in the region's recent history. Sequence of events. The confrontation began with a 911 call from Fran Nicholson, a neighbor, who reported that Mays was shooting at his wife, Candace Mays, near their home. Nicholson expressed concern for her grandchildren, who were due to be dropped off by a school bus near the location. At approximately 2:45 p.m., deputies Billy Jack Valentine, Dwayne Sanders, and Eric Ward arrived at the Mays residence in marked patrol vehicles, wearing uniforms that clearly identified them as law enforcement officers. Candace Mays met the deputies outside and claimed that she and her husband had only been arguing, denying any gunfire directed at her. Randall Mays emerged from the house and corroborated her story, stating he had been target practicing with a gun indoors, a claim that raised immediate suspicion given the neighbor's report. The deputies observed Mays' agitated demeanor and, after a brief interaction, requested additional backup. Deputy Tony Ogburn arrived shortly thereafter to assist. A routine background check revealed Mays' prior felony convictions, prompting Deputy Valentine to inform him that he was under arrest for unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. Mays resisted, pulling away from Valentine and retreating into his home despite orders to stop. Inside, he armed himself with a rifle, escalating the situation into a standoff. Approximately 20 minutes later, Mays climbed out of a window without his weapon, briefly appearing to comply. However, upon spotting Deputy Valentine, he scrambled back inside. Moments later, he opened fire from within the house, targeting the deputies outside. Deputy Tony Ogburn, aged 60, was struck in the head and killed instantly. Inspector Paul Habolt, who had arrived to support the response, was also fatally shot. Deputy Kevin Harris sustained a gunshot wound to the leg but managed to return fire, striking Mays and forcing his surrender. Aftermath. Mays was arrested at the scene and charged with capital murder for the deaths of Deputies Ogburn and Habolt, as well as aggravated assault for the injury to Deputy Harris. The incident left the Henderson County Sheriff's Office and the local community reeling, as Ogburn and Habolt were respected veterans of law enforcement. 2. Evidence. Prosecution's case. The evidence presented during May's 2008 trial was robust, leaving little doubt about his culpability in the eyes of the jury. The prosecution built a case that emphasized both the physical proof of the crime and May's intent to kill. Witness testimonies. Surviving deputies. Deputy Kevin Harris, despite his injury, provided a first-hand account of the shootout, detailing May's actions from the initial confrontation to the fatal shots. Other deputies on the scene, including Valentine and Sanders, corroborated Harris' testimony, painting a picture of a deliberate and unprovoked attack. Fran Nicholson, the neighbor's 911 call and subsequent testimony established the context of the disturbance, contradicting May's claim that he was merely target practicing and highlighting his aggressive behavior prior to the deputy's arrival. Forensic evidence. Ballistics analysis confirmed that the rifle recovered from May's home matched the bullets that killed Ogburn and Habolt and wounded Harris. The weapon's ownership was traced directly to Mays, reinforcing his role as the shooter. Crime scene documentation, photographs of the scene, including bullet trajectories and the positions of the fallen deputies, were presented to the jury. A 911 tape, capturing the chaos and gunfire, added an auditory layer to the visual evidence, intensifying its impact. May's behavior and statements. May's actions during the standoff, retreating to retrieve a weapon and firing after a brief attempt to exit, suggested premeditation. His initial denial of shooting at his wife, contradicted by Nicholson's report, undermined his credibility. Additionally, mental health experts testified about May's paranoia and depression, though the prosecution argued these conditions did not negate his awareness of his actions. Prior criminal history. Evidence of May's felony convictions was introduced to explain why the deputies sought to arrest him and to portray him as a habitual offender with a propensity for violence. Defense's counter-arguments. The defense acknowledged May's involvement but attempted to mitigate his responsibility by highlighting his mental health issues. 2 experts testified that Mays suffered from paranoia and depression, conditions they argued could have impaired his judgment. However, this testimony failed to sway the jury, who focused on the deliberate nature of the shootings rather than May's psychological state at the time. Impact on the trial. The combination of eyewitness accounts, forensic findings, and May's own actions provided a clear narrative of guilt. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, indicating the strength of the evidence against him. 3. Trial proceedings. May's trial commenced in May 2008 in Henderson County, Texas, under the jurisdiction of Judge Joe Clayton. Given the gravity of the crime, killing 2 law enforcement officers, the case drew significant local attention and was prosecuted by District Attorney Mark Hall with a focus on securing a death penalty conviction. Duration. The trial spanned over a week, with the prosecution presenting its case methodically to establish May's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Key evidence. The 911 tape and crime scene photos were pivotal, offering jurors a visceral connection to the events of the 17th of May 2007. Testimonies from surviving deputies and mental health experts rounded out the presentation. Prosecution's argument. Hall emphasized May's intent, pointing to his retreat to arm himself and his targeting of the deputies as evidence of premeditation. The loss of 2 officers was framed as an attack on the community itself, justifying the harshest penalty. Defense's strategy: the defense conceded May's actions but sought leniency by introducing evidence of his mental health struggles. They argued that his paranoia and depression clouded his decision-making, though they stopped short of claiming insanity. Verdict deliberation. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for under 3 hours, a remarkably short time for a capital case, before returning a guilty verdict on the charge of capital murder. In the sentencing phase, they unanimously recommended the death penalty, which Judge Clayton formalized on the 18th of May, 2008. Mays was sentenced to death by lethal injection, marking the beginning of a prolonged legal battle. 4 Verdict. Initial verdict, 2008. Following his conviction, Mays was sentenced to death on the 18th of May, 2008, for the capital murders of deputies Tony Ogburn and Paul Habolt. The sentence reflected Texas' firm stance on crimes against law enforcement and the jury's swift consensus on his guilt and punishment. Appeals and stays. May's death sentence triggered a series of appeals, primarily focused on his mental competency and intellectual disability, which delayed his execution multiple times. 2015 stay. An execution date was halted to assess May's competency, raising initial questions about his mental state. 2019 stay. On the 8th of October, 2019, a judge issued a stay just days before a scheduled execution to further evaluate May's mental health, following arguments from his attorneys that he was incompetent to be executed. 2020 stay. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted a stay on the 27th of October, 2020, to review May's claim of intellectual disability, a claim bolstered by psychological evaluations showing an IQ of 63 and lifelong cognitive deficits. Resentencing, 2024. The turning point came on the 27th of March, 2024, when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals resentenced Mays to life in prison without parole. This decision followed extensive expert testimony, including from a state-hired psychologist, confirming May's intellectual disability. The ruling adhered to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Atkins v. Virginia, 2002, which prohibits the execution of intellectually disabled individuals under the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The court found that May's intellectual deficits, evident since childhood, rendered him ineligible for the death penalty, closing a 16-year chapter on death row. 5 Family reactions. Victims' families. The families of deputies Ogburn and Habolt endured profound grief and supported the initial death sentence as a means of justice. Sentiment post-trial. The 2008 verdict was met with approval, as the families saw it as a fitting response to the loss of their loved ones, both of whom were seasoned officers with deep ties to the community. Reaction to resentencing. The 2024 commutation elicited disappointment. Henderson County District Attorney Jenny Palmer, representing the family's perspective, stated, "While the justice they deserve, and Randall Mays has earned, is now not an option, we gain small comfort in being able to say with confidence that Randall Mays will die in prison." This reflected a reluctant acceptance of the life sentence but a lingering sense of unfulfilled retribution. Mays' family. Mays' family, particularly his wife Candice, offered a contrasting view, focusing on his personal qualities and intellectual limitations. Support during appeals. Candice Mays described her husband as a caring individual who was good with children, a portrayal at odds with his violent actions. She and his legal team consistently highlighted his intellectual disability as a mitigating factor. Response to resentencing. The 2024 decision was a relief for May's family and supporters. Benjamin Wolf, director of the Texas Office of Capital and Forensic Writs, praised the ruling, noting the overwhelming evidence of May's disability and its alignment with constitutional protections. 6 Public reactions. Initial outrage, 2007 to 2008. The killing of 2 deputies sparked widespread anger in Texas, a state known for its robust support of law enforcement and the death penalty. Media coverage in Henderson County and beyond framed Mays as a dangerous criminal, and the public largely endorsed the swift conviction and death sentence as a necessary deterrent. Shifting perspectives, 2015 to 2024. As May's appeals progressed, public opinion became more complex. Mental competency debate. The stays in 2015 and 2019 prompted discussions about executing individuals with mental health issues, though sympathy for Mays remained limited given the nature of his crime. Intellectual disability focus. The 2020 stay and subsequent focus on May's intellectual disability introduced ethical questions, amplified by advocacy groups citing Atkins v. Virginia. Some segments of the public began to view his case through a lens of legal fairness rather than pure retribution. Resentencing reaction. The 2024 commutation divided opinion. Law enforcement communities and many residents felt it undermined justice for Oakburn and Habolt, while others, including legal scholars and death penalty opponents, saw it as a step toward aligning Texas law with constitutional standards. 7 Verdict execution, last 24 hours. As of 11:51 a.m. IST on the 17th of May, 2025, Randall Mays remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence without parole. The resentencing on the 27th of March, 2024, removed him from death row, and no execution has occurred. Within the last 24 hours, there have been no reported changes to his status, legal challenges, or updates from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. His case appears settled, with the life sentence standing as the final resolution. 8 Penalty execution. Texas execution process. Had May's death sentence been carried out, it would have followed Texas' established protocol for lethal injection, the state's sole method of execution since 1982. Preparation. Mays would have been transferred to the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas, on the scheduled execution date. After final statements and visitation, he would have been escorted to the execution chamber. Procedure. Strapped to a gurney, Mays would have had intravenous lines inserted into his arms. Texas uses a single drug protocol involving a lethal dose of pentobarbital, administered to induce unconsciousness, respiratory arrest, and cardiac cessation. The process typically lasts 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a physician's confirmation of death. Observation. Witnesses, including media, family members of the victim and inmate, and officials, would have observed from an adjacent room. Application to Mays. Mays faced execution dates in 2015, 2019, and 2020. But each was stayed due to competency and disability claims. The 2024 resentencing to life without parole rendered this process moot, ensuring he will not face lethal injection. The decision reflects Texas compliance, albeit belatedly in some critics' views, with the Atkins ruling. Conclusion. Randall Mays' journey through the Texas criminal justice system encapsulates the tension between retribution and evolving legal standards. Convicted of a brutal crime against law enforcement, he faced the ultimate penalty, only to have his sentence commuted due to his intellectual disability, a factor that reshaped his fate after years of legal battles. The reactions from families and the public mirror this duality, grief and a demand for justice clashing with ethical considerations about executing the intellectually disabled. As of the 17th of May, 2025, May's life sentence stands firm, a resolution that balances punishment with constitutional protections, though it leaves lingering questions about justice in the eyes of those he harmed. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.